Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman, back with the 165th Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. Really great to see everybody today. We've already got 28, 29 people with us, and we're going to go today with nuclear power, small modular reactors, and the myth that atomic energy is around the corner. We're going to talk about Julian Assange with the great Vinny DiStefano. Wendy Lederman is going to fill us in on Ron DeSantis's private Gestapo. Steve Goldsmith is going to talk to us about a very lethal gas that people know very little about. And he's got an event coming up next week. We'll have him plug that. Steve CARUSO is going to give us the report from Ohio, where today state official Dave Yost is going to try and stop a statewide vote on voter rights. I mean, Ohio is just endless. It's just truly amazing how awful the stuff is going on there. And we also have a situation in Ohio, never ending. We had a priest who was arrested for opening his church up to the homeless. I mean, is Charles Dickens writing our national story here? It's just astounding. In the second hour, we're going to have a free-for-all about someone that everybody's talking about, two people that everybody's talking about, and the upcoming Super Bowl, this will probably be the most watched television broadcast in human history. I'm betting on that, this upcoming Super Bowl, because the whole Michigas with Taylor Swift. I am sure that the viewership, it will also be a good game. These two very good teams. And we are going to start in the second hour at 6 o'clock Eastern time, 3 o'clock Pacific, for a full hour discussion on sports and Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and the Super Bowl, which, in the past a decade, the number one most highly viewed shows on television, 10 of them, the top 10 have all been NFL games. And now we have the right wing completely flipping out about Taylor Swift, who should be a great gift to the GOTV movement. So get out the vote movements. Whether she endorses Biden or not, she is going to encourage people to get out to vote. And we have with us a great sports star from San Francisco, Alyssa Matros, who is the only person I've ever met who was honored at a baseball game, right? A Giants baseball game at home plate not Candlestick, right? But the new field in San Francisco, because she's such a great teacher. So Alyssa, of course, is going to be a 49ers fan. So we'll be dealing with that in the second hour. Although I shouldn't speak for you, actually, but we'll talk all about that. In this first hour, and it's really great, people are piling in. We got 36 folks. We have TIM JUDSON with us. Tim gets the award for best hat, and it's also been a true stalwart on the safe energy movement for God knows how long. And but he has become he's a true expert on small modular reactors and the real situation with atomic energy. And for those of us who've been with this issue for a long, long time, which includes KARL GROSSMAN, who's also with us today, the reality is that there's no there for nuclear power. We're stuck at the moment with 94 atomic reactors. They're certainly there. But people who are out advocating and getting all bent out of shape about how we allegedly need new nuclear plants, the reality is there aren't any. And there won't be any new nuclear plants in this country for at least 5 years. Even if all of us, and this isn't going to happen, but even if all of us who have been opposing nuclear power for all these years suddenly turned around and said, yes, go ahead and build new nuclear plants, they couldn't do it. There's no way physically to build new nuclear plants in this country. Tim, can you, for at least the next 5 years, Tim, can you explain what's going on here? Tim Judson from the Nuclear Information Research Service, and then we'll talk to KARL GROSSMAN. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'd put a little bit of hesitancy to your characterization of me as an expert on SMRs. I'm actually not sure that anyone's really an expert on small modular reactors because they're not something that exists yet. And so
right.
It's really hard to, I mean, one of the things that's really hard to sort through right now is that there's a tremendous amount of really fallacious news coverage about the nuclear industry, making claims, that sort of talk about SMRs and other new types of new reactors as though they already exist, when in fact all they are is blueprints and PowerPoint presentations. But I think what we're seeing, happening is that the nuclear enterprise has been a failure for many decades. I mean, you'll remember from back in the 80s, Harvey, after when the current reactors were being built, that Forbes magazine, ran a front page cover story with the quote that the nuclear energy was the biggest managerial disaster in U.S. business history.
And that's a direct quote, by the way.
Couldn't be justified.
Right. That's a direct quote that called it the largest managerial disaster in American business history, the nuclear power industry. Now, we bring this up because the energy situation and global warming, as we're seeing this insane storm here in Southern California. And by the way, I'm sitting in a house in Southern California where it's been raining for 2 days. It's a monsoon. And we're praying this tree in our backyard doesn't fall over. But the LA Times ran a picture on the front page of a tree that fell on a house and a car a mile from where I am. So this is not cool. And Dave Saltman is going to come on the phone later. His sister was seriously injured by a falling tree in San Francisco, for God's sake. So we're having a real problem here with the climate. And of course, we don't have to, everybody knows that. But the bottom line is that this whole movement for nuclear power is completely mythological. These small modular reactors, which is the total focus of Oliver Stone's pro-nuclear movie. I'm not going to give you the name of it, but I'm in it. Every leftist dream of being in an Oliver Stone movie, he fulfilled by putting me allegedly in a bad light. I think it's fine in his film. And we are reissuing our challenge to Oliver Stone. If any of you know Oliver Stone, we're issuing a challenge to have him come on the call and debate nuclear power. But the whole focus of his film is on these alleged small reactors, which Tim is telling us now. When can we expect a small modular reactor, Tim?
Oh, if they were doing odds on this in Las Vegas, it'd be impossible to place a bet because you'd lose your money. I mean, the current talk is that they're going to have the first of these newly designed reactors online in around 2030. There's 2 projects that are getting each over $1 billion in subsidies from the Department of Energy, to build these what they're calling demonstration projects, which are under contract to come online in 2030. Neither of these projects has their designs approved. They don't have licenses from the nuclear regulatory, and they can't begin construction yet. And so, for first of a kind reactors to be here in 2024, have to apply for licenses and permits, and then begin construction and have it all done by 2030. The nuclear industry in the U.S. has never accomplished this, at least not since the 1960s, when there was effectively no actual safety regulation of nuclear energy. So right. The expectations and the promises that are being made, there's really no actual credibility to them.
Right. So the whole energy situation in the United States now boils down to this reality. There are 94 atomic reactors that are operating in this country. They average about 1,000 megawatts or thereabouts. The last one of them is coming online sometime. They keep getting kicked back in Georgia. The last 4 atomic reactors built in the United States have been complete catastrophe. 2 of them in South Carolina have never been finished, and they won't be finished. $9 billion for 2 big holes in the ground at VC Summer in South Carolina. The other 2 coming in Georgia were originally supposed to cost $15 billion and be finished in 2015. They are now, one of them came online and the other is trying to come online and having all sorts of problems. And that cost is close to $40 billion. So they're $25 billion over budget in the 2 in South Carolina, in Georgia. And at this point in time, there are no other atomic reactors under construction in the United States of the old type. And then the new type, the small modular reactors, Tim is saying, can't be built. We can't even get one under the best possible circumstances for them for 5 years until 2030. So here we are. We're in the midst of these horrible storms, and everybody's talking about we have to get rid of fossil fuels. Everybody, well, not everybody, everybody sane agrees that we have to stop burning fossil fuels. We've been told that nuclear power is the answer, but they can't build any. Is that right, Tim?
Well, they can't build any right now because they don't have any permits or designs approved. So on that practical level, they can't build them yet. And what we see with nuclear energy, and you've just been talking about it with the most recent examples of Summer and Vogtle in the U.S., is that nuclear construction always runs over cost. They always run into major delays. And so the idea that they may have enough political support to begin construction on these new reactors that are now being subsidized, whether they ever complete them, whether they come in anywhere close to the cost or the time, the dates that are being promised is what's really uncertain. And so I think what you've got is an industry that is playing a huge game, a political game of hurry up and wait. Right? Like we need nuclear, like the argument is we need nuclear power because the climate crisis is here. But, we're going to need to wait 10 to 20 years for these reactors to get built and come online when we need to reduce emissions by 2030. And so, that's, I think there is a way in which nuclear power has one of the roles that it's played for at least the last couple of decades, if not much longer, is that it's the perfect excuse to do nothing to phase out fossil fuels, right? Like if you're going to build thousands of megawatts of nuclear reactors in 20 years, then there's no point in building, tens of thousands of megawatts of solar and wind now. And so, we've seen this happen again and again where utilities use big plans to build nuclear reactors sometime in the future as an excuse to not invest in energy efficiency, solar, wind, the things that are actually available and affordable now.
Right. So here's the big picture on this is that this mythological, we call them small mythological reactors or small mutant reactors, this whole myth that we're going to get these small reactors.
Sometime maybe reactors.
Sorry?
Sometime maybe reactors.
Sometime maybe reactors. It's that these unicorns are going to come running down the road and we won't need to go to renewable energy. And what we're seeing now in a particular reactionary moment, I'm a firm believer in the astrological impacts of the planets on the political picture. And we're seeing, authoritarianism all over the world. And we're also seeing a huge attack on renewable energy, where they're killing solar left and right, especially right here in California, which is completely insane. And one of the excuses for doing it is that we're having a nuclear renaissance. This is like the 10th nuclear renaissance that I can remember. And, it's utterly unbelievable that they're killing solar and wind as fast as they possibly can. But this is the excuse they're using. So, when we're looking at the nuclear and we're looking at the energy issue and we're looking at the climate crisis, this whole insanity about small reactors is at the core of it. And it's a complete myth, right, Tim? I mean, they just can't do it.
Yeah, there's if we're talking about climate survival at this point, then there's it's completely insane to start talking about nuclear, supporting nuclear power for that. And what's interesting is that there's at the same time that there's that all this propaganda about how great nuclear is and how essential it is to solve the climate crisis. There's been a series of things that have happened just in the last 2 months that really prove just the opposite. And one is that there was this big commitment announced, or this big announcement made by the U.S. State Department at the UN climate conference back in December, that they had 22 nations on board with with the goal of tripling nuclear energy by 2050 worldwide. And that sounds like a big goal. It would be completely huge and unprecedented for the nuclear industry to even come close to achieve. But at the same time, there were 130 nations and eventually 200 at the climate summit that endorsed a goal of tripling renewable energy worldwide by 2030. And the fact of the matter is that renewable energy already provides 3 times as much electricity worldwide as nuclear energy does now. So if they're going to triple renewable energy by 2030, and then I'll get to the second point of that in a minute, you're already talking about, renewables providing 10 times as much energy as nuclear power does today within the next 5 to 6 years. So why would anyone continue investing in nuclear beyond that point when it's clear that renewables are gonna be able to fill the gap already? The other thing that happened was that the International Energy Agency, which is no great friend of the environment all the time, put out a report last month that showed that, in fact, we are on track to be able to meet the goal of tripling renewables by 2050, and that 95% of that is happening in wind and solar. The things that are blocking it are things like the fact that the countries just can't access the financing to be able to make the investments in doing it. And so at the same time, we're seeing the nuclear industry pushing the US Congress to expand international finance for nuclear energy projects that wouldn't be happening, until the late 2030s, 2040s.
It's completely irresponsible. And it's shocking in many ways because a lot of the impetus in the United States is coming from the Democratic Party. Joe Biden has been a major promoter of nuclear power. And I was just horrified in 2007, I walked the halls of Congress with Bonnie Raitt to talk to members of Congress about killing a loan program for nuclear. And we did it. I mean, Bonnie and Jackson Brown and Graham Nash, we had a lobby day and we talked to members of Congress, and we talked with Harry Reid, who was the Speaker of the House at the time.
Senate Majority.
He was the Majority Leader of the Senate. And Nancy Pelosi, who was, I think she had just become, no, she was, I think she just became Speaker of the House. And Ed Markey, who became a senator, and they all agreed, and we killed a $50 billion loan program for new nuclear plants. It was an enormous event for which we can thank Bonnie Raitt, Jackson Brown, and other people. And in one case, we had lunch with a congresswoman from the Denver area named Diane DeGette. And she was really nice, and we had a very successful session with her, and she helped oppose the nuclear loans. And I just saw now that she's signing a bill to promote nuclear power, which we can't be built. So it's mind-boggling to me. Karl Grossman, do you want to jump in on this? Karl, you did a lot of reporting on the COP conference. Can you tell us what drug were they on when they were talking about tripling nuclear power? Because it's completely insane. Oh, Karl, we always have to unmute you. Sorry. Let's see if we can get you here. Karl Grossman is one of the great, been with us many times, and he's one of the great experts on nuclear and has done a lot of reporting on that COP conference. Here we go, that Tim mentioned. What are these people thinking when they're talking about tripling nuclear power when they can't even build any?
Well, the small modular nuclear reactor gimmick, and it's more than a gimmick. I'm just actually trying to put onto the chat, and I'll do that in a couple of minutes, a real devil's workshop for small modular nuclear reactors, and that's taxpayer-supported Idaho National Laboratory. And I was just going to put on their pitch. I mean, they're big on this. I just did I did earlier, 5 minutes ago, a link to Gordon Edwards, and he's the president of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. And he's a specialist on small modular nuclear reactors and other so-called advanced reactors. With the small modular nuclear reactors, the bit is they build them in factories and then ship them to the site, and then they'd be there. Like presto, you'd have 3 or 4 SMRs on that site. It wouldn't be like has occurred through the years, a big battle, a big fight against a nuclear plant under construction in your area. They'd be factory produced, and boom, they're there. There's all kind of problems with these proposed machines, particularly a proliferation problem, nuclear weapons proliferation problem. And I mean, just huge problems, nuclear waste, of course, and so forth. And as Tim is talking about, the big rationale these days for more nuclear and advanced and improved, new and improved nuclear power is climate change. And this is no way to deal with climate change. The way to deal with climate change is to commit fully to safe, clean, green energy technologies, and they're here.
Right.
No miracles are needed. Existing technology can provide all the safe energy that we need. So it's just another chapter in this long, hideous chapter of people promoting and pushing with falsehood after falsehood. They lie like they breathe nuclear power.
Right. And the point is that, this sounds like we're beating this horse over and over again, nuclear power, but it's like it's at the cutting edge of why we can't get into climate change, why we can't save the climate. If we can go to 100% wind and solar, which we have available now and ready to go, we can solve this problem. And I don't have to worry about my tree falling on my house here in LA, where, came out here worrying about drought, and all of a sudden we're building Noah's Ark. I mean, it's ridiculous. David Hughes from Pittsburgh, haven't seen you for a long time, David. We have 50 people with us on the call. We're going to go from this to Julian Assange, and then in the second hour, we're going to be talking about, we're going to have basically a Taylor Swift sing-along. So we'll do that. But David Hughes, go ahead.
Harvey, it's good seeing you too. Is that real behind you? I don't think so. Anyway, a bunch of us just got finished, quote unquote, with fighting Energy Harbor's extension of the Perry plant for 20 more years. This is the pro-nuke strategy right now. As Tim was sort of saying, I think they need more time to build these fake reactors, so they're extending the license. The NRC hasn't turned down one license, as far as I know, extension. So Perry is getting 20 years, and then Energy Harbor is going to sell it. And Perry is dumping tons of tritium into Lake Erie, radioactive tritium. People don't know it, and we can't get people northeastern Ohio to know anything about it because the goddamn media won't cover it. It's unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. I got to warn you, we're not allowed to use four-letter words, Dave. You haven't been on the call before. So that's not a bad one.
Oh, you're including damn. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I think so. I'm not sure. But if you want to curse, everybody, we've issued this before. If you want to curse in Yiddish, it's perfectly fine. But otherwise, yes, Perry in Ohio is the only reactor in the United States that's been hit twice by an earthquake and damaged. It was the first reactor in the United States to be damaged by an earthquake, and now it got hit again. And here they are extending the license 20 years, as they're doing at Diablo Canyon in California. And they're even trying, and Tim is well aware of this, to take a reactor that was shut at Palisades in Michigan and restart it. It's insane. It's like you got a car on blocks in your front yard with no engine, and you want to go out and get it back on the road. It's unbelievable. MYLA RESON, and then STEVE GOLDSMITH, and then TATANKA.
Wasn't there a reactor where there was an unexpected earthquake? It wasn't very large, but it seemed to do some damage in a reactor called Anna or North Anna.
It's North Anna, Virginia.
Right.
And that was the earthquake that also damaged the Washington Monument. But
right.
Yes, North Anna, Virginia was hit by an earthquake.
But I just wanted to say that every time I hear, for example, Carl was just referring to small nuclear reactors, I like to call them so-called small because although they may be smaller than the ones that are online right now, I think that you have to assume that the nuclear industry did a study to find out what would be most appealing and what would sound like it's really not too dangerous, it's just small. So they did some kind of name testing, maybe and they decided that people would be more likely to accept them if we call them small. I
think the next thing they're going to do is they're going to call them unicorns, so that everybody will love their unicorn nuclear unit number 1, unicorn unit 2. Steve Goldsmith, did you want to chime in, and then TATANKA? Thank you, MYLA.
Yes. One is, I think the history of nuclear energy is tied to the nuclear weapons. I forget who it was, read a book about, how atoms for peace was a way of, and I think that that's still kind of thinking is operating. The oil industry, oil and fossil fuel, I think they're part of this strategy because they're pushing hydrogen, they're pushing gas versus oil, they're pushing carbon capture. All these fantasy strategies all go to say, don't make renewables, true renewables, work. And so I think this is part of their strategy. It doesn't matter whether it works or not. They cook it up to divert it. Because of the thing I'm going to talk about later, I get a newsletter from Oil and Gas Journal, and it's full of this kind of stuff. And then the last thing I think we have to talk about Obama, who got the Nobel Prize for wanting to do away with nuclear weapons, and he revamped the nuclear weapons and then also approved 2 power plants. So
Well, yes,
very deep.
we mentioned the 2 reactors in Georgia, Vogtle, and Tim, do you want to tell the story of how that started, Tim Judson?
Well, I'd hand it over to you for that, Harvey.
Okay, because Obama, in such classic Obama slickness, he referred to his energy policy as all the above. And all the above included these 2 reactors in Georgia, where he got $8.3 billion in interest-free federal loans in 2007, I believe. No, 2008 or 9, I think. And they were supposed to be done in 2015 or 16. They were supposed to cost $15 billion. They're just now coming online, and they're costing $40 billion.
Well, and
this
by the
is
way,
all Obama. So
and by the
there
way,
you go.
that $8.3 billion in loan guarantees they got from the feds back in 2009 or 10 got increased to $12 billion a few years later when the cost of the project skyrocketed and they went when Westinghouse went bankrupt.
Right, and it was Trump who gave him the extra money. So
Don't
they should
forget, Harvey, that Obama's right-hand man was Rahm Emanuel. Used to work for Constellation in Chicago.
Rahm Emanuel was a piece of work, boy. Thanks for that, Tim and David. Tatanka, you live within what, 10 miles of Diablo Canyon?
Right.
Are you glowing in the dark yet?
Not yet, fortunately. I wanted to ask any comment that Tim and Steve, Tim and Carl, and Steve, if he wants to chime in. We're looking at, perfect examples of corporate capture of government, of media, of political parties, of Oliver Stone, I suspect. And then also commenting about what was said about the original reason for nuclear power reactors existing is the creation of fissile material for nuclear weapons. So did anybody have any links on weaponry in space or other places where they actually need these things to continue?
Tim?
Well, there's a couple of things, and I'm really glad, Tatanka, that you raised the issue of essentially corporate capture of the politics and the regulations, because I think that's what really is going on here is that the utility companies are blocking blocking the transition to renewables in every way they can, and again nuclear is a great excuse for them to do that. But as a for instance, what David was raising a couple minutes ago about the reason why they want to keep all of these old reactors running for as long as they can is because that keeps the industry alive until someday, maybe eventually in their dreams they can build new reactors to replace them. The nuclear industry through 2021 and 2022 with the big federal legislation that got passed. That legislation could turn out to be worth over $100 billion in various subsidies and incentives for the nuclear energy industry. It's an extraordinary amount of money that was put on the table for that. Whether they can actually take advantage of it, who knows? They didn't do very well with the last round. But the nuclear industry spent over $190 million. They reported spending over $190 million lobbying the federal government in 2021 and 2020. Now, the vast majority of that were actually the utility companies that run and operate nuclear power plants around the country. The utility industry itself spent over $200 million lobbying the federal government in those 2 years. There's overlap between the nuclear industry and the utility industry, but the utilities don't just invest heavily in politics at the federal level. they're investing even more money in, in politics and lobbying and everything else at the state and local level, because that's where their bread gets buttered by the state utility commission. And so the level of political power that the utility industry has to be able to block climate action or to accelerate it is massive. And right now they're clearly siding with slowing the pace down, just as you guys are dealing with in California, with all these changes to net metering for rooftop solar, and these things that are really torpedoing the potential for us to accelerate the transition to renewables, much faster than the utilities, ever want to see happen.
Tim, you're right. We see it at the local level. Listening to the attorneys for Mothers for Peace, in touch with the NRC, totally can't talk with them, corporate captured. Even the California Public Utilities Commission, and of course PG&E, and then Gavin Newsom's reversal. It's all tied in to.
Well, to give you a scope, thank you, Tatanka. And to give you
Carl, anything you want to say about it?
What's that?
I asked Carl if he wanted to comment.
Well, let me jump in on California here. Anybody, and then we'll go back to Carl. Anybody who doubts that, we keep talking about nuclear power, and I'm sure some people roll their eyes, but the reality is that this is at the heart of the climate crisis. This is what's causing the problem. And because we have these two nuclear plants in California, that there's a vested interest in keeping them operating, and apparently Gavin Newsom, who could, by the way, be president in 2025, don't write that off. They're keeping Diablo Canyon open. At the same time, the CPUC passed a single change to the rate structure in California and killed more than 80% of the rooftop solar industry in this state. We had 70,000 people working in rooftop solar, which generates more power than Diablo Canyon by far. And they have laid off more than 14,000 workers because of a single change in the state rate structure, and killed 80% of the rooftop solar industry in this state. It's catastrophic, and it's all because of nuclear power. What can I tell you?
I want to just mention one other villain in this piece, which is the building trades, who have control the Democratic Party in many ways because they produce the troops and have an actual contract with the Western States Petroleum Association to do their bidding in the state legislature. And I'm sure they have a similar contract with the nuclear people because they want to build those and build the big grid projects. And they're have rammed this solar
anti-solar. I mean, who would have thought in this country that you could be against solar power?
The only comment I want to make on that, Steve, is when the agreement was signed with Jerry Brown and Gavin signed on to it to close down Diablo Canyon, all the unions, including the IBEW and the building trades, were for that, along with the environment. They see the path there. We worked with them in California Green New Deal legislation. They're willing to work for it, but you're right. The bread is buttered there. They're trying to find a way forward, but the money just overwhelms the whole problem for depending on their livelihood.
Right, and the unions, weirdly enough, they support big desert-based solar projects. They're in favor of those, but they're against rooftop solar because they haven't bothered to unionize the 70,000 workers in the rooftop solar business. Why don't they get off their butts? That's a 5-letter word. And organize the men and women who are putting the panels on the rooftops. They haven't done that. It's a nightmare. We're gonna have to wrap this up quickly, but Connie Kline, you're in Cleveland. Tim was talking about. I can't resist. Tim was talking about how much money the nuclear power industry spends on lobbying, and how very, very correctly, astutely pointed out, a lot of the money now is going to states, to the regulatory agencies. In Ohio, they bribed the Speaker of the Ohio House with $61 million in order to get a $1 billion bailout through the Ohio legislature. And they got it through the legislature, but the FBI caught the Speaker of the House, and he's now in prison for 20 years. You know, I wish that was more widespread. Connie, I know you were close to Larry Householder and have been sending him cakes with files in it to get him out of jail. But give us a quick report from Cleveland, if you would.
I was actually not gonna. I put some stuff in the chat, and I put this in the chat. I wasn't going to talk specifically about Perry or the.
Okay, we got to do it quickly. So,
but I attended 2 very sobering NRC meetings this week, all-day meetings regarding autonomous advanced reactors, at least heavily automated, if not fully autonomous, to reduce operators at these advanced nuclear plants. Tim, were you at that meeting? Were you?
I wasn't.
Okay,
I wasn't. But yeah, well, we
Very
have
scary.
seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's, there a couple weeks ago in Congress, there was a representative from one of these, SMR companies testifying in Congress saying that there's only 4 jobs that need to be done to operate their quote unquote operate their reactors. And so it's, I mean, it's one of these things that I think hasn't really, I mean, it hasn't, that they haven't really been called to account on, is that, a lot of these new reactors, what they're designing them to have as few employees as possible. So aside from from temporary jobs in building them, where are going to be the jobs in nuclear power if this is the direction the industry goes?
So basically, we're getting self-driving SMR, small nuclear reactors, like self-driving Teslas that can't recognize stop signs and or children crossing the street.
And then
Connie, did you? My condolences, by the way, on having spent 8 hours at an NRC meeting. I don't know how you could do that. I do want to mention very quickly, by the way, that they did purge. There was one guy on the NRC, Jeff Barron, who was at least reasonably receptive to questions of public safety, and they just purged him from the commission. But go ahead, Connie, finish up. I want to give Steve a minute to mention his upcoming event, and then we're going to go to Julian Assange.
Actually, that was all I wanted. Another cheery aspect to advanced nuclear reactors. That's really all I wanted to
Well,
say.
I can't imagine anybody spending 8 hours at an NRC meeting, and I hope you got therapy afterwards, or at least go down to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or something. Okay, so anyway, listen, folks, Tim Judson, always an honor to have you with us, and come back soon.
Great discussion, Harvey. Thanks for having me.
I've been, I did in 1959, there, how there's foreshadowings in your life that you can never account for. In 1959, when I was bar mitzvahed, the Schachters across the street gave me a copy of Our Friend the Atom from Walt Disney. And I actually did a report on nuclear power in 9th grade. Who knew? And if you asked me from 1959 to 1973, I would have told you that nuclear power is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But then when they came into our town with the 2 reactors and we stopped them, I was already an expert on nuclear power because I had read Our Friend the Atom. So there you go. Listen, thank you, Tim, again. Come back anytime. And in fact, I may want to talk to you Wednesday night on our radio show. So let me get in touch with you, Carl.
Sure.
It's great. We have 50 people on the call. This is the Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition. This will be rebroadcast Thursday night in New York at the Progressive Radio Network. We're going to go very quickly before we go to Julian Assange. Steve Goldsmith, you have an event coming up. Do you want to tell us about that event and this briefly on this gas issue that you're raising? Go ahead.
I can't have 5 minutes.
Well, do it quickly. If you can do 4, that would be great.
Okay, I can share screen.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I had it here.
Okay, and your issue is hydrofluoric.
Okay, so let me talk. Okay, so we're having this event on the 17th. There are 41 refineries in the US, and if I have a little more time later, I can scroll through them and show them there might be one near you. This is a chemical called hydrofluoric acid. It's the most dangerous chemical according to the EPA and several other government bodies. It's used in large quantities in places that are vulnerable to accidents like explosions, which happened in Torrance in 2015. And there was it was a near miss, according to the Chemical Safety Board, of 50,000 pounds. It forms a cloud and moves from the community, similar to the Bhopal chemical, a different chemical. It killed 16,000 and injured over 100,000. So we're trying to get them to convert, which there are alternatives run by large companies. It means that these refineries would have to spend a bunch of money. We have this mass organization. It's a great thing for talking to Republicans, because a lot of these communities the refineries are in community areas. And it's a great thing to use against Republican Congress members who haven't done anything. Our Democratic Congress members, Lou, Barragan, and Maxine Waters, have all been very strong, have come to events, spoken out. Janice Hahn and the Board of Supervisors of LA County have provided transportation to local regulatory bodies which have failed to act despite what their staff has said. And in the next week or so, the EPA will possibly put a rule out to require them to change, but probably not. And then we're going to need to raise money for lawsuits. But if you go to TRAA.website, and up at the top, there are all kinds of little videos. And later I could play a very sweet little video done to the song by Leonard Cohen of Everybody Knows. And this is extremely dangerous, low chance, but very high consequences. It would wipe out the economy of southern Los Angeles County. So if you're in LA County, come down to Torrance, help us. Every additional person will, raise spirits and keep this organization going. And it won't go till 1 o'clock. It'll probably be 10 to 11, and then we'll march over to the refinery and stick a big sign on their billboard saying HF has got to go. And the M that you'll see around is because they put in some phony modifier that doesn't do anything.
Well, listen, Steve, you'll come on, get in touch with me afterwards and come on our radio show, California Solartopia, on Wednesday, and we can promote it again. Okay, so make sure I have your contacts, and I hope by next Saturday it stopped raining.
We have 2 weeks. It's 2 Saturdays. It's a week.
Oh, okay. Oh, 2 weeks. Yeah.
You can drag and drop your flyer into the chat,
but
if you want to share it.
So how do I do that? Yeah.
Just
thank you.
Grab the folder and drag it into the chat.
Okay.
And Wendy, in Florida, you said you're close to a similar facility. Is that right, Wendy Liederman? Did I read your chat properly?
There aren't any in Florida.
Okay.
There's 4 in Louisiana. There's some near Chicago. There's one 10 miles from Joe Biden's house in Delaware, and it has an endpoint, according to their report to the EPA, of 17 miles for death or serious injury. And Joe Biden is living right in there, which we have sent multiple letters. And the 21 attorney generals, including California and New York, wrote a letter to the EPA saying they can and must drive these refineries to convert.
Okay. Well, listen, get in touch with MYLA and I. We'll have you on Wednesday in LA, and we'll draw attention to this. Thank you so much, Steve. That's great.
Thanks.
Greatly appreciate it. Hopefully we'll listen to your song later in the show, if not next week. I want to remind everybody, next week we're going to have Keith Ellison on, thanks to Heidi Tripp, our friend in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and we want to have ways that he can shut the Monticello. Prairie Island will be great, but Monticello they're having real problems with, and getting a public nuisance order is a great idea. But we will continue to focus on that. Hopefully, Keith will show up next week. That will be great. Thanks again, Steve. Okay, 15 minutes to the hour when we're going to be joined by Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. But in the meantime, we want to talk about Julian Assange. We have Vinny DeStefano with us. Vinny, you want to take it over and tell us what the latest is with Julian Assange?
Actually, Vinny got stuck at the doctor's with his mom, right? Anne Batiza is here. Vinny's got stuck at the doctor with his mom right now. So he sent Anne, who he speaks very highly of, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say. She does great work. Sorry about that.
Okay, Anne Batiza, you're in Milwaukee, is that right?
Right. Yes, we have an Assange Defense Milwaukee chapter, and I'm part of the National Organizing Committee for Assange Defense. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk. And an anonymous donor is funding a project proposed by Paula Isela and myself through the Courage Foundation and Assange Defense, and it is to mail postcards, this kind of, oops, let's see if you can, I'm going to have to get rid of my background. Postcards to all members of the House. And let's see if I can get rid of the, where's none? There's none.
It's all right. Just, there you
yeah.
go.
So anyway, it's to mail postcards to all 432 members of the House of Representatives, asking them to support House Resolution 934, which is a resolution to both drop the charges against Julian Assange and drop the extradition. And on the card here are listed 4 major abuses by the CIA and the FBI and our government in the pursuit of Julian Assange, including downloading the contents of his lawyers' computers and phones when they went to visit him in the embassy, surveilling his conversations there, eliciting false testimony from a criminal who then recanted that testimony after the trial, and then plotting to kidnap or assassinate Julian. So it's impossible to see that Julian could get a fair trial in this country. We want to highlight this for all 432 members of the House. We're hosting mailing parties all around the country. And I'm wondering if anyone on this call would be either interested in taking part in those mailing parties. We supply the cards, the stamps, the labels for every member of the House. And we ask people to sign the back of the card and put a little message and maybe even put their return address label on there so that the person knows who's signing. So that is what we're doing. And if anyone is interested in this, if you could put your name in the chat, your name and your email address, then I can get in touch with you and be helpful if you tell me where you are. And what I was doing today, you saw Jim Morrell here, we're mailing out these boxes of materials to people around the country who are hosting parties to put these together and send them in. So that's my spiel. And by the way, a critical time is coming up. It's called Day X for Julian, February 20th. That is the day that the UK High Court will decide whether or not his final appeal can be heard. If it cannot be heard, they might immediately extradite him. If it can be heard, they'll probably play the waiting game they've done and postpone that hearing for quite a while. But thank you very much, Hari and Mike, for letting me speak about this today. And again, if anyone is interested in doing this, put your name in the chat. I'm going to have to run off to the post office to mail these boxes that we've been putting together. So I'm going to have to run off. I apologize, in about 10, 15 minutes. So if you think you might be interested, please do that.
I cannot imagine that the Biden administration, given all that's going on in Gaza and the border and all the other stuff, I cannot imagine that they would want to bring Julian Assange into the United States at this point. Is that, am I off here? I mean, it would make no sense before the election to bring him into the country.
Well, they've done a stalling game. The major hearing was back in 2020, and he's been in Belmarsh prison only on remand for extradition to the United States, going through court procedure after court procedure that I mean, it's so Kafkaesque. Obviously I don't have time to go into that, but yes, they may just keep him there for another round of hearings. Vicky, did you have your hand up? I saw Vicky.
Is there a Vicky with her hand up? I don't see.
I don't know. Vicky Olvera,
No,
did you have your
maybe
hand up?
clapping or something.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Okay. But yes, I mean, it's been ridiculous. He's not been able to sit with his lawyers. He was put in a glass cage in the initial hearings back in February of 2020. Then he was in a plastic cage with little slits, and he would have to kneel down and send Post-its to his lawyers in the back of the courtroom, and then they would do like hand it off to the people so that his lawyers in the front of the courtroom could actually get his note. He could barely hear. He had a mini stroke during one of the trials. It's been a travesty. It's a travesty, and the media are not covering it, which is why the American people know absolutely nothing about this case other than what the CIA and the intelligence community has been feeding them since 2010 to smear Julian. Julian's an amazing publisher, and in the trial, there was all this testimony about how it was Julian who insisted on redactions, and it was Julian who spent 4 months with a newspaper in Italy to make sure that names were redacted, and so all of these things that people think they know about Julian, I hate to say it, but they're lies.
Well, it's astounding. You'd think this guy, given the treatment or the mistreatment that he's endured, you'd think he was a mass murderer or something. But this guy has, all he did was publish stories. It's astounding. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. Mary Butler Stonewall, do you want to quickly ask a question? I want to slip in one more thing before we go to the football stuff. Mary, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just real quick, like I'm 100% on board with Julie's fight for freedom, and we can't be acting like we're astonished that media isn't covering it, because 90% of our media and news outlets and everything are all owned by the same people. Even here in Spokane, a Spokesman Review, they tell me, no, we don't have investigative reporters anymore. We just report what we're told to report. That's what I've been told by the news agencies with television, as well as the local newspaper. And this is predominant throughout the United States, that all our local newspapers no longer do investigative reporting. They just report what they're told. And as long as that's going on, people like him will be put on trial. Anybody that steps out of the status quo. So any investigative reporter stands a chance of being in the same shoes he is. So if you know people that are investigative reporters, if they don't stand with him, they will eventually end up on the same chopping block as he's on. Thank you.
Very well spoken, Mary. Thank you so much for that. It is terrifying. Anne?
I just want to add one thing. One bright note is that 2 of the lawyers and 2 of the journalists who visited Julian in the Ecuadorian embassy, who are U.S. citizens whose rights were violated, her Fourth Amendment rights, are suing the CIA. And the judge in that case is allowing that hearing to continue. So they're in discovery now, which is wonderful.
Where is the trial?
Southern District of New York. John Caddell is the judge. I was actually there when he rejected the CIA's motion to dismiss, not in part, and enough so that the lawsuit can continue.
So isn't that where Trump is being tried? If they cross paths with Donald Trump going into the courthouse?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not up on that. I see. Can I ask Sandy Bolzenius? You say I sent my contact to you, but I don't see your contact. So I'll put my email in the chat. And if anyone, if I don't get to you, please get to me. And I'll put my email there in case you want to take part in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely great. Essential stuff. Wendy, you've got a report on DeSantis's Gestapo, which I want to move, if you don't mind, to the second hour. And I hope you're going to be writing an article about it. That would be great. Oh, Vina Colley is raising a hand. Vina, did you want to say something from Southern Ohio? Vina, hold on here. Vina Colley has been active against the Portsmouth nuclear facility in Southern Ohio. Vina, there you are. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say a couple of days ago, we got a newspaper article out about the plant,
and they're ready to turn over this 80 acres to SODI, the community reuse group that's paid by DOE. And they're calling these two modular reactors, they're calling them powerhouses now. And so they're ready to go forward with the two modular reactors here at Piketon. And they want to send everyone's transuranics waste to Piketon for us to reprocess. And that's been the biggest secret here since the 50s. We've been reprocessing since 1953 or 54 when they started production. And so they have it in their mind. They want to clean up all these other sites, and they're going to send their plutonium that's got transuranics in it to Piketon for these small modular reactors.
Wow. Thank you for that, Vina. The bad news from Ohio just keeps coming. Steve Caruso, we were going to talk briefly about what's happening today in Ohio, where the Dave Yost is going to intervene. Can you tell us what's happening with this voting rights bill? And maybe towards the end of the second hour with Wendy, if people get tired of football, we'll talk again about that. But what is happening today in Ohio on voting rights?
Well, the Supreme Court in Ohio is supposed to get on Yost and make a decision about whether he can block the petition of a group. The head of the title of the petition is Ohio Voters' Bill of Rights. And similar things have been passed before in Ohio, and they can't understand why, he's calling it misleading and it's misrepresentative. So it's actually not a referendum, but it's a constitutional ballot adjustment, just like the abortion or pro-rights bill was passed last fall. So
Dave Yost is the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he actually is talking about running for Senate against Sherrod Brown.
No, you're talking about somebody else.
Is that LaRose?
I try to forget his name. I tell you.
He's a reprehensible guy.
He's an upstart, man.
Today, he is challenging the right of hundreds of thousands of Ohioans who signed a petition to have a constitutional amendment on the ballot with a laundry list of everything we support on this call of protections for the right to vote in Ohio. And he has taken issue with the title of the bill. And this is Dave Yost, and has gone to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has come to him, and they're saying now that they're not going to allow the state, the voters of the state, to vote on a voter bill of rights, which is, outrageous, beyond outrageous.
They certified a bill called Nursing Facility Patients Bill of Rights in 2021 and another Ohio Voters Bill of Rights in 2014. So I don't think this guy's got a leg to stand on. There could have been an answer already for the Supreme Court today, but as you see with all the courts in the federal jurisdictions all pausing their actions all of a sudden for some reason, I think the people deserve justice and we need it now. You catch the rest of the show at grassrootsep.org.